Now, principalities, for those who are not Catholic or Christian, is the common reference that is made to demons. Demons, hell, and satanic influence. Principalities that exist. It is the slow-rolling peer pressure that has effectively pushed proper, moral, and virtuous people into silence. This is simply a part of their faith, with backyard weddings that are conducted under Sharia courts and pretend as though we need to be politically correct with a regime which is currently stealing and systematically raping, and yes, it is rape, under the current definition, our children. Effectively, the story crunches down to this. 32 ISIS brides left an internment camp in Syria, headed for Australia. Penny Wong had the gall to come out and say that the government did not assist in the repatriation process. Somehow, they still managed to enter this country. Do we understand how diabolical this is? G'day, welcome back. The Labor government is trying to save 32 Australians from depravity in Syria, and it raises a very interesting question. What does Australian citizenship mean? Jacinta Allan is refusing to step down after the CFMEU scandals, and stabbings every day, everywhere, and all the time. We'll get into all that and more on the Mark Pirotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Pirotta Show.
Before we get into our main topics for today, let's take a quick look at some news that is sparking interest across the country. The first one is this. Nigel Dalton came out last week and gave an interview with Joanna Howe, which pulled at the heartstrings in a way that I can't even really iterate. The phrasing that he used within this interview was something that has not been spoken or uttered within the political, specifically the Australian, landscape for a very long time. Listen out for the quote right at the end of this clip and just for a moment, pause and think about the depth of what that actually means.
It's just happened.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
Exhausted,
Yeah.
I think, and concerned, worried, and all the emotions in between, really.
Yeah.
But I know that I've done the right thing.
And was this a hard decision for you to say that I'm going to cross the floor on this gag motion on abortion?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no way, if you join a government party, that you want to do this. My regret is that I didn't stand up earlier. I should have stood up in the campaign. I basically lied to the community that we wouldn't change the laws on abortion. I want to do that. I voted for the gag order. That's my fault. I have to take that. Once Bobby Catter made it known to the public that he was going to try and discuss abortion, I thought this is my time to redeem myself in the eyes of the public, say sorry, but also in the eyes of God. That's who I serve. I have to stand up for what I believe. And my response to this issue was I had to cross the floor.
I really wanted to do this interview because I wanted to encourage you, but I also wanted the next generation to see what political courage looks like.
The battle is not against people. It's against principalities.
We are not in a battle with people. We are in a battle with principalities. Now, principalities, for those who are not Catholic or Christian, is the common reference that is made to demons. Demons, hell, and satanic influence. It is the idea that many of the battles that we face as humans today are not of this world, but they are influenced by the principalities that exist with the sole purpose of destroying humanity, which is the creature that God loves most. It is a very interesting way to end a statement that effectively says, I made a mistake and I fell into the trap that is politics, which to a large extent forces people to be outside of their faith. And in doing so, he betrayed not only himself, not only the people he represents, but also his God. And to a large extent, many of us do that in our day-to-day lives today. We are not willing to suffer the slings and arrows of potential misfortune for want and will of getting in trouble for our speech and our ideas. There is a difficult line to toe in public life where you want to make the most possible good. But at the same time, I believe that we've fallen into a situation in our lives today where we speak so little about what we truly believe, that the average consensus seems to be that which is entirely opposed to what we actually believe. That we are willing to go along with these insane ideas, I believe, is a consequence of our inaction, not a consequence of the action of others. It is the slow-rolling peer pressure that has effectively pushed proper, moral, and virtuous people into silence, excluding them from public life, and elevating everything that is degenerate within society, leading to where we are now as a Western culture, where the sacrifice of children is commonplace, sacred, and protected beyond any other right that is given within our Western societies. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please do's is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. While we're speaking about all of that, let's take a quick look at someone else who thinks that they are a protected species. Jacinta Allan. Now, if you had in any other business portfolio up to potentially $30, $40 billion missing as a consequence of fraud under a portfolio that you manage, you would think that your first thing would be, let me resign before I get fired. But not so for public officials. Jacinta Allan has dug her heels in what can only be called one of the most uncomfortable interviews of all time, where she somehow tried to sidestep questions about the CFMEU as it relates to Victoria today. Watch.
Will you resign as Premier?
No.
What is it, $30 million? Would that warrant resigning? $100 billion?
Those claims have been untested and been identified as
But you show no
untested and
interest
not
in
well
testing
founded
them.
by
Is that
the
not worth the
administrator.
resignation?
Have we got any other questions? No.
Jacinta Allan knows her time is effectively limited at this point. She is trying to pretend as though there are wins that she has won under her belt, but at this stage there's almost none. She's releasing infrastructure projects that were started 10 years ago under a Labor government that has failed on every single deadline and every single budget on every single project since it started, and still trying to claim them as wins even though they are abject disasters riddled with fraud. This is the logical conclusion of a left-wing ideology that bends the knee specifically to the red tape and to the indoctrination virtue-signalling mob who decide what, where, and when a government and a building group can actually complete projects. When every rock can be called sacred and when every single site has to be tested and managed with about $400 million worth of approvals from all sorts of organizations, specifically Indigenous ones, who will block a project simply because it started, then of course you're going to blow your budget. And then you bend the knee to the people who consistently stop you from being able to do your job, causing what is now one of the greatest hospital and aged care crises in the country, second really only to South Australia, another Labor government. And then you wonder why crime is so high, why general happiness is so low, and why there is such a push for something different. And the polls for Victoria, with One Nation specifically, coming now in second place to the Liberals, is something that ought to frighten the entire political world. And while we touched on crime quickly, in Maryland, over the course of the last 12 hours, we have heard reports of a stabbing that happened. Now, this stabbing wasn't just a normal, everyday, drug-related offense. This was just another day at a shopping center, and 3 people were stabbed and 1 person has lost their life. We're still very, very thin on the details, and people are already starting to call it terror and a potential Islamic attack. In my estimation, I would say it's more likely going to be a mental health issue, as we have seen happening across the globe at the moment with people who are consistently medicated instead of being institutionalized. There is a rising crime rate that cannot be controlled, both from an immigrant population, which somehow or another will slip through the new measures introduced by the Allan government to target potential crime early, teaching people from a very early age somehow how to avoid and stop the early warning signs of criminal behavior, while simultaneously bringing in people who are 20, 30, and 40 years old who will never be within these programs. And while all that is happening, we are still going to be seeing these sorts of scenes with police officers looking absolutely distraught, seeing scenes that no human should have to see. Watch.
Got to get to some breaking news. This just coming into the newsroom. One person, we believe, has died and 2 others are in a critical condition. This is after a stabbing in Western Sydney. The incident occurred on Memorial Avenue in Merrylands just after 10 o'clock this morning, so not even 1 hour ago. A crime scene has been established. A manhunt for the attacker is now underway.
And to close out the segment on crime, this final clip indicates how many children have currently been entered into forced marriages in New South Wales. This is specifically for New South Wales, but it is a national issue and it is underreported. So whatever number you see here, double it, triple it, you'll be much closer to the real number. This is one of the most horrifying news stories, especially in light of the Epstein files that we have seen recently when it comes to child sexual exploitation. And while the world is meandering about the potential Israeli influence and connection with the Epstein files, there is an entire faith that is centered and growing within the Australian community, which is actively victimizing children and claiming, much like they did with their prayer that was illegal in Sydney not 2 weeks ago, that this is simply a part of their faith, with backyard weddings that are conducted under Sharia courts, which they pretend as though do not circumvent the current Australian legal system, and pretend as though we need to be politically correct with a regime which is currently stealing and systematically raping, and yes, it is rape, under the current definition, our children. Watch.
14 children in New South Wales have reportedly been forced into marriage as new data exposes what authorities say is a hidden and deeply underreported crime. Reports to the Child Protection Hotline have almost doubled in the last financial year, according to the Sunday Telegraph. There are reports unofficial ceremonies are being conducted by Islamic clerics in suburban backyards beyond the reach of authorities. Since 2018, New South Wales has seen 117 cases reported, but experts warn many more go undetected.
And that clip leads us directly into our main story for today. Because somehow the Australian government thought that they were going to slip it by us a second time. The first time we found out when the ISIS brides had landed on the tarmac that they were here. This time they didn't quite make it that far. Effectively, the story crunches down to this. 32 ISIS brides left an internment camp in Syria, headed for Australia after gaining Australian passports. Now, so many questions need to be answered here. Number 1, how did they get passports? Number 2, what made them now, not 6 months after we had our first tranche of ISIS brides hit this country? Did they think to themselves, now is the time that we ought to be able to make a move and go back to Australia? Not only that, they are listed as coming back with their children. Now, we understand the way that Islam treats children is not the same as the way that the Western world treats children. A child who is 16 who is raised in the Western world has not spent 4 to 5 years, at the very least, training in terrorist military tactics. There are videos that pop up every day of children as young as 6 from Islamic regimes learning how, what to say, and exactly where to commit terrorist attacks. This is not some sort of fringe thought process. This is something that we have seen consistently from the Islamic world. And so the idea that 13 and 14-year-old boys who are, by an Islamic estimation, military age, coming to Australia with their mothers who went willingly from our peaceful country to Syria to marry ISIS-linked terrorists, stayed there for the better part of 10 years, some of them, and then they think that they can come back to this country. Why? What makes them think that that's a possibility? Now, Anthony Albanese came out on ABC and effectively said it's not happening. We are not repatriating the ISIS brides. We can watch that now.
Won't repatriate them, and indeed the government was taken to court by one of the non-government organisations saying that we had a responsibility, and they weren't successful in that. My mother would have said, if you make your bed, you lie in it. These are people who went overseas supporting Islamic State and went there to provide support for people who basically want a caliphate. And, you know, it is...
unfortunate for the children, though, caught up in that, isn't it?
It is, but we have a very firm view that we won't be providing assistance or repatriation. Of course, Australian law applies and there are obligations that Australian officials have, but we want to make it clear as well, as we have to the people involved, that if there are any breaches of the law, then they will face the full force of the Australian law.
Now, you see, the problem is that the internet is forever. Everything that you say online and everything that is said by your colleagues, just by yourself, or by anyone associated with you can always be dug up. And you might say to us that they will not be repatriated. But at the end of the day, the question is not whether they will be repatriated or not by your government. The question is, will they come back to Australia at all? Because if they do, then you have betrayed the Australian trust. And we know that they can, because in the exact same way as you said that they will not be repatriated, just less than 6 months ago, we had Penny Wong say this.
The Australian published the original report reporting that these ISIS brides will be returning to Australia. The government has said that they have not provided assistance to returning ISIS brides. How does the government define assistance?
Repatriation assistance.
Does the Prime Minister consider providing citizenship by descent to be assistance?
The government
So it is not assisting someone to return to Australia to provide them with the documents they need to enter Australia?
well,
I understand your discomfort.
No, it's not. I think it's just a sort of a clever way of asking the same question.
Thank you,
That's
Senator
all.
Wong. It's very kind.
Even despite the fact that Penny Wong had the gall to come out and say that the government did not assist in the repatriation process, somehow they still managed to enter this country. Do we understand how diabolical this is? The government might come out and say and pretend as though they do not have a hand, but at the end of the day, inaction sometimes is just as bad as action. Now, on this particular occasion, the Australian public got wind of it before the Australian government could take hold of the narrative. The Australian public got wind of it, and there has been a technical issue that is now forcing the ISIS brides back into their internment camp. If these brides make it back to Australia, if they actually do manage to come here under some sort of citizenship repatriation program, then we need to have a referendum. We need to have a change to the clause of statelessness. Our current constitution bars us, and our current legal system bars us from being able to revoke the citizenship of anyone who is not currently a dual citizen, even if they are linked to terror. That is diabolical. As a person, if you join an organization which is called Islamic State, and as we've spoken about before, Islam as an ideology as itself creates a state. So Islamic State, the organization, and Islamic State, the ideology that exists in pretty much every Islamic regime, while they are separate, are linked at the hip at ideology. And so Islamic State is a state. You cannot tell me that just because you do not recognize them as a group, as a nation that has sovereignty and that has an ability to have citizenship, that you would be doing anything legally or morally wrong by revoking an Australian citizenship of anyone who flies over to another country to join an Islamic regime or any other terroristic regime. Not that I know of any other regime which actively hires, manipulates, and indoctrinates young women in order to go and become the brides of terrorists, some of which have married 5, 6, 7, 8 different terrorists because they continue to blow themselves up. And then we can act as though we are truly a nation that takes the law seriously. We are falling behind. And not only are we falling behind, we are kneecapping ourselves. This isn't a tough question. This is not a question that really needs any debate over. Are you affiliated with terrorists? Yes, you are no longer an Australian citizen. Baseline. Done. That is not a value that we uphold as Australians. Now, nothing quite represents this, like the satire, much better than the ABC's as usual, that was done by Hugo Lennon, someone who I didn't think I'd bring up in a positive light on this podcast ever, because many of the things that he says I do find abhorrent. But what he did here with a group of his friends was something that seriously actually needs to be spoken about, because he was the person who was actually responsible for the Aussie posters that we saw of the terrorists who went to Bondi and shot up 15 people on the beach. He was the person responsible for those posters. And it's interesting because at first everyone thought it was left-wing extremists who were trying to say that he's still Australian. But as it's come out, that was the intention by Hugo Lennon, in order to make people realise that, one, it is deplorable to ever call that person an Aussie. And then, by outing himself for who he is, which is at least tangentially linked to the NSN, that he, as a right-wing person creating satire, got the exact reaction that was required. And that reaction was this. Everyone in Australia knows that that is not an Australian. Everyone knows that the faces that were posted in Melbourne were not Australians. And yet, everyone thought to themselves, potentially, that this was left-wing extremists attempting to make a point about the fact that everyone is an Australian. And the flip side of that coin is that Hugo Lennon managed to achieve something that almost no political party has managed to achieve. He highlighted, preempted, and to an extent prophesied this moment, because right now, the Australian government and members within the government are still trying to call these people Australians. Not only them, but also their children. And while I understand the heartstring moment that has to be pulled to say that those children are also not Australian, you cannot in any way, shape, or form convince me otherwise. Those children are not Australian. Their mothers are not Australian. Their fathers most definitely are not Australian. They do not have a right to come to this country, and if they do, they ought to be put in immigration detention for the better part of 15 years, until, as they have been indoctrinated, they can also be unindoctrinated. And we'll end with this video from Hugo Lennon so you can see what I'm talking about these posters. Watch.
Now unmasked himself. Hugo Lennon, a far-right social media provocateur and primary organiser of the March for Australia anti-immigration rallies, posted social media videos showing him putting up the offensive material while wearing high-vis clothing. The posters hijacked the style of well-known artist Peter Drew.
That will do us for the show today. I think that I will probably be doing an episode tomorrow and Friday now. The Friday episode might look a little bit different, and whether it releases on the Friday or potentially on the Saturday to do a bit of an interlude. I feel as though 5 days was a little bit too long between drinks, and so I want to do something in the middle there just to, continue the conversation and make sure that we're not going too long without actually posting something and engaging. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who consistently comments, who consistently likes and watches the show. If there's anything else you do want me to dig into and you want me to speak about, just drop it down in the comments. If you disagree with anything that I've said, please make sure that you disagree in the comments section so that we can have a discussion about it. And if you win, I'll bring it up on the show. In any case, I hope that this accelerates the political conversation and that there are more people who will get involved in politics. Judging from some of the comments that we've been seeing online, there are plenty of people who are, with attendance specifically at One Nation events, up something like 1,000% over the course of the last 2 months. But that will do us for the show today. My name is Mark Pirotta, and this is the Mark Pirotta Show. I'll speak to you guys tomorrow. God bless.